Throw some orange on because it's Friday and it feels good to know that Bill Self was, in fact, so close to coming back home, which builds a new storyline as the Cowboys head up to Lawrence, Kansas.
You are Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma State Cowboys, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Howdy, y'all, and hello, all. Welcome back to Locked On Oklahoma State, your daily stop for all things Cowboy and Cowgirl related. My name is Cody Stovall. I want to thank you kindly for stopping by to make this your first listen. We're available on all of your podcasting platforms, visually as well on YouTube. Find me personally on X at All Day O State. Today, we're brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, especially right now. And new customers can get $150 back in bonus bets. If you're first, a $5 hauler is a winner. Get with FanDuel today. Meanwhile, we shift right into the conversation of Bill Self, the Cowboy that was, in fact, so close to coming home. And, of course, from a personal perspective, this does feel kind of good because between social media and comments, when we were covering this stuff, obviously, there was an idea that it was fake news and it was clickbaity and bull honky. So it is nice to see that this stuff is finally starting to matriculate out a little bit more. But I also think that this is kind of like, I don't know, releasing of information on purpose via the agent from Bill Self, because I think they're trying to set an example for the KU fan base that be careful what you're hooting and hollering about because Bill Self was so close already to leaving KU. So if you're unhappy about his performance and you're unhappy about the current state of the program in Lawrence, even though you're ranked number 23 in the country, I understand that the massive loss to BYU on the road is something that's hard to get over. And you could make the argument to some degree that perhaps Bill Self is having a little bit of a difficulty adjusting to the new landscape of college basketball. Because ironically enough, when it comes to NIL or, I don't know, financial compensation, guys like John Calipari and Bill Self were way, way, way ahead of the curve, whether there be improprieties or not, nonetheless. Now that NIL is allowed everywhere and every school has some semblance of the ability to put some of this stuff together, I do think it is causing Bill Self to reel a little bit, but it would have been absolutely fantastic if we would have ended up in Stillwater. We missed our opportunity years ago when Eddie Sutton was set to retire. We decided as a university to keep Eddie Sutton around a few more years to hand the keys over to Sean Sutton instead of hiring Bill Self. And ever since then, Oklahoma State fans have kind of been kicking ourselves, hoping, wishing, waiting, wondering when Bill Self would finally come back home, because it almost felt like inevitably Bill Self would want to retire in Stillwater, America, possibly at some point in time, if things ever got somewhat downtrodden in Lawrence, Kansas. And last year, the KU fan base was already unhappy. Then they were talking about the heart attack causing him to potentially lose some of his luster and things of that nature. The transfer portal was successful for KU, but some of the biggest names they got in the portal are not living up to their previous stops. Right? I know one of their top transfer portal players was averaging like 13.6 points a game last year. He transferred to KU, and now he's only averaging like 6 points a game. Things like that, of course, are going to be problematic for KU fans, but much like Robert Allen, Oklahoma State sideline reporter, putting out some leaks about the Board of Regents meeting and the fact that there was parameters put on it and deadlines put on it. I feel like that was systematically, I know words are hard for me, released to help garner some public outcry over the deadline and things of that nature, and it worked. So I also think this is another extension of something similar to that. Some of this information is being put out, and Bill Self was put in a position where he did have to answer some of it. And he did admit that he's had some meetings with Oklahoma State. He has meetings with Oklahoma State almost every time there's a vacancy opening. Traditionally, we haven't been able to afford Bill Self. Traditionally, we haven't been able to convince him to even consider leaving KU in Lawrence, Kansas. I feel like because of the way he was treated last season was the thing that opened the door at least a little bit to make it a viable conversation. Now, of course, at the end of the day, after multiple meetings in two different states that we know of, the deal got kiboshed by somebody, and I'd imagine it's somebody in the Bill Self camp that feels some type of way about certain scenarios that could potentially pop up if Bill Self were to come back to Stillwater. So it didn't happen. But one of the bright sides we can take from all of this is Bill did talk about how even if he doesn't take the Oklahoma State job or he's not super interested in the Oklahoma State job, he's always been somebody that was willing to throw out names or help us kind of navigate the waters of some of the potential guys we could bring in to interview for the job. And Steve Lutz obviously is the new Cowboy head coach. I don't agree with the contract that we gave Steve Lutz. I do think it was a little bit too high and definitely way too long, especially after we went through the ordeals of Mike Boynton and before that, obviously Travis Ford. The years of those two contracts for those two coaches was the problem, right? Recruiting, acquiring talent, all of that wasn't necessarily an issue in Stillwater, but we find ourselves in a precarious spot because we give long contracts to coaches that don't exactly pan out. So, do I agree with the Lutz contract and the length of it? No, I do not. But Bill Self has said that Steve Lutz is a good hire. And I firmly believe that if we made it that far with Bill Self, he would have given his recommendation after letting us know, hey, after all, turns out I probably can't take this job. I shouldn't take this job. I need to take care of some things back in Lawrence, Kansas, and continue to keep Kansas basketball in the upper echelon of the country. And even though they are ranked, he is catching so much grief right now from KU fans. And I get it. The standard is high. The standard in Lawrence, Kansas is winning Big 12 titles, making runs at Elite Eight and Final Fours, and occasionally national championships. In the last couple seasons, that hasn't exactly come to fruition for KU. Plus, he dealt with the health scare. Plus, he dealt with the Adidas, extra backdoor deals that were going on. So he did deal with a decent number of things off the court. And I'm sure that Bill Self would like to leave KU, whether it be via retirement or, just taking a different job on his own merits. He would like to go out as a Big 12 champion. He'd like to go out as somebody that did make a run at an Elite Eight or a Final Four or even potentially another national championship run. He's earned that. He's deserved that. He's good enough to get that amount of time in Lawrence, but obviously they're becoming impatient. And with Oklahoma State just experienced with Mike Gundy and the Board of Regents and Dr. Schrum, I think we are somewhat close to this situation. And another thing this does do is it kind of builds a little bit more of a storyline for our game against KU in Lawrence, Kansas tomorrow. So some of the individuals that were not going to watch the ball game due to some of the things that have kind of come out recently, it will, I think, add more eyeballs to this game. So for Oklahoma State, it could be an opportunity on a more of a national scale to make a little bit of a statement. And what has been an improved season. There's absolutely no way that anybody can say that this Steve Lutz basketball team isn't better than Mike Boynton's team last season. The blowouts obviously are a little problematic in making that argument, but statistically speaking, Steve Lutz has done more. He has been better. And the late additions in the transfer portal are a byproduct of us hiring late. If Chad Weiber is going to get any negative attention, it should be because of the timing, right? Nobody could have made the argument that Mike Gundy should not have fired several coaches midseason, and that would have given us a much more of a level ground to stand on when it came to replacing the staff. But that didn't happen. Same can be said for basketball. Should Mike Boynton got an extra year or two because of the COVID and the bull honky $300 you're going on probation and banned from postseason thing? Yes, he did. He deserved an extra year or two for that. But it almost feels like the only thing that Chad Weiberg is not willing to do is ruffle feathers. And at your position as the athletic director, you have to make sure that the head coaches are doing their jobs. And part of their jobs is to make sure that everybody's being successful. And sometimes you have to fire guys in order to get success. So Chad Weiberg is not really somebody who seems to be willing to stand up for himself and rock the boat. But nonetheless, we did accomplish quite a bit with a complete overhaul in staff. But KU needs to be somewhat mindful of what they're doing. The fan base, if they continue at this rate, they are going to push out arguably one of the greatest coaches in all of college basketball history. And that's maybe not a smart move. or if it is, it should at least be conducted a little bit better on his behalf. Speaking of conducting things better, it's time to make some money, honey. FanDuel is your one-stop shop when you're trying to get the most out of your monetary capabilities. Whenever it's tip-off, the NBA action is just now getting hot for you. And there's not a better place to enjoy the heat than with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game. So even if you miss a little bit of the action or the opening tip-off, and you can bet on the comeback in the fourth quarter, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. FanDuel's live betting feature makes it completely, painstakingly easy for you to get the most out of your buck, the bang for the buck, whether it's backing your favorite team or predicting a late game rally or your favorite player to hit a clutch three. You're not going to miss any opportunities if you're with FanDuel. Plus, the app is super safe, secure, and easy to use. Plus, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 back in bonus bets if your first $5 bet is a winner. Just visit FanDuel.com and join today. That is FanDuel.com for your shot at 150 bones back in bonus bets. Make every moment matter more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. So the Cowboys do, in fact, get on the road to take on the KU Jayhawks in Lawrence, Kansas. Amidst all of this stuff that's permeating in the airwaves now about Bill Self, the meetings at Oklahoma State, and his agreeance that Steve Lutz was going to be a good hire regardless of how it transpired. This is setting Oklahoma State up for a lot of opportunities. Are we set to get our first road victory in Lawrence, Kansas against the old Cowboy Bill Self? Probably unlikely, especially with all the turmoil that he's had to endure since the BYU loss from his own fan base and from some disgruntled people around campus. It could go one of two ways, right? He could have completely backtracked on some of the goals that they set in the locker room. He could potentially lose some guys. He did talk about there's been a little bit of a difficulty with everybody on the team buying into their specific roles. Perhaps that drubbing by BYU is what is necessary to kind of correct all of that. Or perhaps this continues to linger and the Cowboys get their first road victory of the season against Bill Self, which could change the storylines even more. So if you're an Oklahoma State Cowboy fan and you're talking about Steve Lutz in somewhat disparaging a light, I would like to remind everybody that the Cowboys are in a better position than they were last season. We've already won more games than we did last year. We've already won more conference games than we did last year. We've already blown the home winnings completely out of the water. We're like 10-3 at home. Now, we are like 0-8 on the road. That is a problem. I get that. I'm tracking. I'm with it. But by and large, Steve Lutz has been somewhat successful in the year one rebuild of Oklahoma State basketball. And maybe we can carry over from the UCF game. We dropped 104 points to beat the Knights in Stillwater, Oklahoma. And it's the first time we've scored 100 points since like 2017, if I recall correctly. Bryce Thompson had a career day with 25 points. Abu Usman had 17 points. He even got hot from the three-point line to some degree. Arturo Dean had a big day with 16 points. Khalil Brantley, who's typically the facilitator, had 15. Chi Avery had another 10. I would have liked to seen him get to go off a little bit more against his previous squad. But nonetheless, the Cowboys made their hay in the turnover department, outperforming them 26-5 with points off of turnovers. And you know what? We do get to the line a lot. We're not a great free throw shooting team, but when it comes to actually getting to the line and it being a percentage of our points, we're like 8th in the country when it comes to points coming from the free throw line. And just indicative, in my opinion, of how often we get there. We're one of the tops in the country at getting to the foul line. If we were a phenomenal foul shooting team, this record could look entirely different. Now, the one argument you can make about Mike Boynton possibly being even to, if not better than Steve Lutz, is even though we didn't win as many games, we darn sure did not protect the Gallagher-Iba Arena in Stillwater. and we didn't, do as well in conference, so on and so forth, is he did not get absolutely demolished all that often. Right? That's been the one caveat to Oklahoma State basketball this season is we typically don't lose close ones, right? We either win or we have some absolute ridiculousness happen like TCU, or we get demolished, right? So losing by 20, unfortunately, has become somewhat normal this year. And that is the one thing that Mike Boynton did not do. We lost more. We lost significantly more, but they typically weren't blowouts. And that was even frustrating as an Oklahoma State fan to have so many games where you lose by 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 9, things of that nature. It was frustrating because you're this close. But from an X's and O's perspective, when you are this close, you have to find ways to end games. And we just could not do that under Mike Boynton. Even Travis Ford found ways to win against top 5 teams in Gallagher-Iba and occasionally on the road as well. The last W we actually had in Lawrence, Kansas was with Cade Cunningham. This is an improved ball club, right? We're not massively better only because of the blowouts. That's the biggest black eye on the season. Other than that, this team does hustle more. They care more. They play defense better. They seem to be more in sync. They actually run plays. They have a somewhat legitimate half-court set, which Mike Boynton never had. And that stuff has to be taken into consideration. We are back in to some degree on recruiting Jalen Montanati. Does that mean we're going to land him? No, probably not. But it's kind of like some of these conversations you're hearing in football, which we are going to cover some of the recruiting because there is a big uptick currently happening in Stillwater America. And we're in on some guys that, just a couple months ago, we weren't even in their top 10, top 15s. Now we're all of a sudden climbing into people's top 5s that at one point in time kind of dismissed us as a viable option to continue their football careers. But yeah, the Cowboys have a good opportunity here, and there's going to be more eyeballs on this game due to the storylines of not only KU getting dominated by BYU, not only the fact that Bill Self did have several conversations with Oklahoma State about the coaching vacancy before he gave his stamp of approval to end up going with Steve Lutz because he wasn't done dealing with some things in Lawrence, Kansas. And the Cowgirls come back home for senior night. And this Cowgirl team is pretty awesome. Of course, I was frustrated. You were likely frustrated. The loss to BYU, a not very good BYU team, kind of took us out of winning the Big 12 championship in the regular season because since then, K-State, TCU, Baylor, they just keep winning. So we're not necessarily falling further behind, but it doesn't look like we're going to have a lot of opportunities to catch back up. But we do have to take into consideration this is a very good Cowgirl basketball team that can do some things in the NCAA tournament and the Big 12 tournament. My biggest concern with this squad is having the ability to have consecutive really good games. The biggest issue I've seen is we'll have a phenomenal, magical game because we've beaten every single team ranked ahead of us in the conference, but we drop games that we shouldn't, right? So if we can string together successful performances back to back to back to back, that will allow us to make a massive run at both tournaments. We're not out of winning the regular season Big 12 tournament. It just seems very unlikely at the moment because now we're banking on some teams ahead of us to have catastrophic losses. And you got to give credit where credit is due. By and large, this team doesn't lose all that often. Now, one of the top teams, I think it was K-State, did lose to Colorado earlier in the season, which is exactly who the Cowgirls get to take on next. But the Buffaloes have to come to Stillwater America. And on senior night, we give a shout out and honor to the sharpshooter, the Estonian assassin Anna Gret Asi, Stacy Jones coming back home to be a Cowgirl, Riley Langerman, who's been battling adversity and injuries for a multitude of years now. Tenon Magassa has been a good addition to this Cowgirl ball club because he's a legitimate shot blocker that at the very least changes what the offense is trying to do when they get in the paint. Alexia Smith, we've had to rely on her to spark the offense a few times this season, and she's very reliable. And, of course, Landry Williams, who's had knee surgery after knee surgery after knee surgery. She just couldn't catch a break. And the Cowgirls now have the opportunity to get their most wins with a win tonight, their most wins since 2014. Additionally, if we win this evening, it will be our second best Big 12 season since 2020. And we still have Staley Hurd. We still have Jacie Hoyt. We still have the Praise Gallagher-Iba coming back. Micah Gray is somebody that we can rely on almost every night to put up points in bunches. This is a really good Cowgirls ball club. And Colorado Lady Buffaloes do hold the overall advantage over the Cowgirls. So if we win this evening against Colorado, we kind of trim that gap to where they only have a 1-game lead. And now that they're back in the conference, we'll have the opportunities to kind of shut that stuff down. So people need to show up, show out, get out to Gallagher-Iba Arena, because this Cowgirl squad has already done some things that we haven't seen since 2020, 2013, 2014. And we're just a few wins away from making some of those numbers even look a little bit more pedestrian. So regardless of the Big 12 title race and the fact that Oklahoma State likely, with their loss to BYU, kind of put themselves a little bit too far behind the 8 ball to continue to make that run, but postseason is still here. And again, the talent, the ability, the bench, all of that equals a very solid ball club. The only deficiency we have is putting together back-to-back solid performances. They don't even have to be legendary, just solid. We can beat anybody in the country, point blank, period. But we can also lose to teams that will not even sniff the NCAA tournament. And that is the only problematic issue this season. Thankfully, we've done very well in the transfer portal, so there's no doubt that Jacie Hoyt will be able to do that once again in this next season. Plus, we have some of the youngsters like Praise Gallagher-Iba that have time to develop. Jaden Wooten has been a phenom as a freshman, and she's only scratching the surface because she's almost a role player this season. There's been times we've needed her to take over games, and she has. But there's also been times we just simply need her to run down the court, facilitate the offense, get rebounds, make things happen, drive and dish. And she's been able to do that as well. So she's fulfilling a role, much like Staley Hurd did last season and even the first part of this season. Staley Hurd's numbers would look significantly different if she wasn't such a team player, but she is. And thankfully, we still have Jacie Hoyt. So we have time to continue to do the daggone thing. Speaking of doing the daggone thing, Arizona State did that in the Big 12 championship in football. They were this close to taking down Texas, but of course, referees love Texas. It is what it is, but we need more. With the Big 12 currently in a slightly precarious situation, with the SEC and the Big 10 trying to flex their muscles and potentially move the Big 12 and the ACC and the G5s completely out of the way. I think that alienation of 70% of collegiate football fan bases would not be a good business model. So hopefully Greg Sankey stops the butthurtness of making this even viable. And I do think this stems primarily from his thoughts that some more SEC teams deserve to be in, and his thoughts about the fact that Arizona State and Boise State received those buys and got that extra $8 million bonus that he feels that SEC schools should be more entitled to than anybody and everybody else, which is exactly why we're having this little Arizona State segment, because as a Big 12 and Oklahoma State, we need Arizona State to get back to where they used to be at certain sports. They've got like 5 or 6 national titles in baseball. When Oklahoma State was winning 16 consecutive big conference championships between the Big 8 and Big 12, Arizona State was going to Omaha over and over and over. I think they've been like 22, 23 times. Arizona State baseball is legendary, and we need Arizona State to get back to that level because it's going to help with the overall perception of the conference, just like their performance against Texas should help with the overall perception of the conference. Wrestling. Arizona State also used to be absolutely legendary in wrestling. I know they've got at least one national title in wrestling. They might even have a couple. We need Arizona State football to remain where they are. And with Kenny Dillingham at the helm, I don't see that changing anytime soon. Could they potentially have seasons where they kind of, dive back down to 7, 8, 9 wins? Yes, it does happen. But in this cyclical world that we live in now, we need the most advantages that we can for marketability for the Big 12. We need more eyeballs to get on the Big 12 so we continue to have that level of respect. Not having a quote-unquote blue blood or a every year flag bearer for the conference. We need to get behind each other. And I also think with the things that are transpiring now, we're at war. The Big 12, the ACC, the G5s, we are now no longer under any circumstances going to look for the benefits of the SEC and the Big 10, even to some degree. So as we all band together, we kind of need SMU to be successful. We need Clemson to be successful. We need Florida State to be successful. We also need Arizona State to be successful because football drives the bus. Football makes the money. We all get that. But when it comes to perception, what do people watch in basketball? Everybody watches March Madness. Everybody watches the tournaments. Not very many people, unless you're a fan of the school or a fan of the conference, watch the regular season games. I think the same can be said in baseball. Not only because games are longer, it's a little bit more difficult to pay attention to, but it's not like college baseball is all over TV all the time. So it's even harder to see some of the regular season college baseball games unless they're like epic matchups. But everybody pays attention to super regionals in Omaha. So Arizona State needs to get back to that. And the same conversation can be had in wrestling. Iowa State is amazing at the sport of wrestling. But right now, Oklahoma State's kind of carrying the banner. Missouri also has years where they're absolutely phenomenal in the sport of wrestling. And then we've got some additions in the last few years to the Big 12 that are doing some things like Utah Valley. I don't know how they're a top 4 national team, but they are. And we experienced that when we wrestled them. They are very, very good. There's other teams in this conference that, make it difficult for people to feel confident and going and getting victories. But we need Arizona State to get back to where they were in wrestling. We need them to get back to where they were in baseball. We need them to continue. Oh my gosh, I can't speak English. Their uptick in football. And again, Kenny Dillingham is an Arizona State guy from Arizona, went to school right up the road, and he's been able to kind of put a pigeonhole on the recruiting in the state of Arizona. All of that is absolutely phenomenal. We just need Arizona State to help with the Big 12. Use your success you had in football. Use that national notoriety and kind of help the other sports. Because the Big 12 is now in a position that we need to be put on the biggest scale possible at every turn that we can. And basketball, the Big 12 has been running everything for years now. This year, it's kind of been the SEC. So we need somebody in the Big 12, whether it's a Houston or a Texas Tech or a KU or an Iowa State, to make a huge run in March Madness to accentuate that the Big 12 might be, quote unquote, down, but we're still the kings of basketball. Because perception isn't always reality, but it can be if the perception is pushed hard enough, far enough, for a long enough time. So we need the Big 12 at the top of every sport, regardless of who it is. This is the time for the Big 12 to rally together and get behind teams like Arizona State that have a rich history. I mean, Arizona is one of the juggernauts of softball. We need them to be good. When you look at even basketball, Arizona is a juggernaut in basketball. We need them to be good, and they do look pretty good. I think they're the most underrated team in the conference at the moment. So, anywho, that's all we're going to have for this one right here. Arizona State, we love you. Welcome. We need you. Carry this momentum you have from football, and financially, we know you got that extra $8 million from your CFP appearance. Use it in other sports. Help the Big 12 stay in the right lenses from a viewership standpoint. All right, y'all. So we're going to have for this one right here. As always, you know I love you. God bless. Go Pokes. Thank you for tuning in to make this your first listen here in Locked On Oklahoma State. You could be anywhere. So happy you choose to be here. On podcasts and people out there, you're everything. You know what to do. hit the stars, leave a review. Later, my taters.